Paul Heyman breaks silence on Seth Rollins' injury. Roman Reigns returns ahead of SummerSlam. Just weeks before WWE SummerSlam, the landscape has shifted dramatically. Seth Rollins is officially ruled out, and Roman Reigns is back with a vengeance. In this video, we dive into Paul Heyman's shocking update on Seth Rollins' ligament fracture that has sidelined him from SummerSlam 2025, and the explosive return of Roman Reigns that could change the entire WWE storyline. With the Tribal Chief back in action and Seth out, who will step up, and what does this mean for the future of WWE RAW? What happens when the man trusted to carry the future of WWE is suddenly torn from the stage, just weeks before the biggest event of the year? What if the cheers of the crowd faded not because of defeat, but because of something much darker, a fracture not only in his body, but in the very heart of the company? This is not just a wrestling story. This is a saga of betrayal, pain, and the return of a force the world thought had disappeared into silence. As Seth Rollins lies broken in a hospital room, Paul Heyman steps forward, not with sympathy, but with strategy. And just behind him, in the shadows, a name begins to rise again: Roman Reigns. The Tribal Chief is back, but at what cost? Before we continue, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear is the untold story behind the collapse of one empire and the rise of another. It began with a whisper backstage, trainers moving quietly. Seth Rollins limping, his knee wrapped in ice. He waved off help, saying he was fine, just a tweak. A sprain, maybe. But his eyes told a different story. The pain wasn't just physical. It was existential. He knew. Even before the doctors did, just days after his brutal encounter with Gunther, something snapped. Not just in the ligament of his leg, but in the illusion of his invincibility. For months, Rollins had been the heartbeat of Monday Night Raw. He was the world heavyweight champion, the architect turned kingpin, and the man who had promised to hold the company together after Roman Reigns' disappearance left a power vacuum. But now, he was the one in the wheelchair. The official word came in a private announcement. Paul Heyman, eyes cold and voice steady, stepped before a curtain of reporters backstage, leaned into the microphone, and delivered the words that sent shockwaves through the WWE universe. Seth Rollins has suffered a severe ligament fracture. Effective immediately, he has been ruled out of SummerSlam. No further questions. No detailed prognosis. No apology, just silence. A silence that said everything. The arena went dark that night, not in lighting, in spirit, because when Seth Rollins fell, he didn't fall alone. He took with him months of anticipation. Dreams of fans who had watched him bleed and claw through main events. Hopes for a SummerSlam showdown. Plans, partnerships, predictions, gone in an instant, and behind the scenes, Paul Heyman moved like a man who'd been waiting for this. He didn't look surprised. He looked ready, and that's what scared everyone. In a private interview leaked just hours later, Heyman's voice was eerily composed: "We all have our time at the top. And when that time ends, another must rise." Seth had a good run. But destiny never waits. Destiny, the word hung heavy because in WWE, destiny wears a black vest, carries gold, and walks like a god among mortals. Roman Reigns, the man we hadn't seen in nearly 100 days. The Tribal Chief. The head of the table. He had vanished after WrestleMania. No press. No tweets. No appearances. His silence became a vacuum. And in that silence, names like Cody Rhodes, Seth Rollins, and Gunther began to rise. But all empires fall, and when they do, the old kings often returned. It happened on a Monday night. No build-up. No announcement. The lights cut out mid-show, the music stopped then. A single beat. Dun, that echo of a war drum that only one man commands, and then, the words that shattered the arena: "Acknowledge me." The crowd erupted into stunned silence, then hysteria. Roman Reigns walked through the smoke, not as a man reclaiming his throne, but as a man declaring war. Gone was the gold. Gone was the smug smile. This was not the Reigns who played politics. This was not the Reigns who sent Solo Sikoa to do his dirty work. This was a man who had been betrayed. A man who had watched Paul Heyman shift allegiances. A man who had stayed silent while the empire he built was used by others, and now, he was here to take it all back. Backstage, chaos followed. Seth Rollins, still confined to a hospital bed, was silent. He'd seen the footage. He'd heard the pop, and somewhere inside him, something cracked again. Not a bone. Not a ligament, something deeper, because Rollins knew, the moment Roman walked back through that curtain, it was over. Everything he built, everything he fought for, the belt, the locker room leadership, the responsibility, it was no longer his. It had been reclaimed. And Heyman? He didn't blink when asked about Roman's return. He offered just 2 words: right on time. This wasn't an accident, this wasn't coincidence, this was a plan. Sources backstage confirmed what many suspected, that Heyman had been in contact with Reigns weeks before SummerSlam. That the concern for Seth's injury was never genuine. That Heyman had been orchestrating a silent coup all along. But why? Why betray the man who had carried the brand through chaos? Why manipulate the downfall of the one champion who never walked out? The answer lies in Roman's eyes. That night on Raw, when the lights came back on, and Reigns stood in the center of the ring, staring into the camera, it wasn't just a return. It was a warning. To everyone, especially Heyman, you see, Roman Reigns didn't come back to align. He came back to conquer. And Seth Rollins, for all his brilliance, was merely the first pawn to fall. In a private segment never aired, Reigns confronted Heyman in the parking lot. No words were exchanged, just a long stare and a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk from Reigns. As if to say, you thought you could control this story. But I am the story. Back in the hospital, Rollins reportedly turned off the TV after watching Roman's return. According to Becky Lynch, who stayed by his side through the night, Seth didn't say a word. Not even when the nurses came in. Not even when the painkillers kicked in. He just stared at the ceiling, broken not just physically, but spiritually, because what hurts more than injury is knowing that the world kept turning without you, that the arena still roars, that the throne you protected now belongs to the man you swore you had moved past. Roman's return wasn't just a surprise, it was surgical, strategic, and in some twisted way, personal. SummerSlam now looks nothing like what it was meant to be. No Seth Rollins. No grand title defense. No triumphant continuation of a reign built on resilience. Instead, the prophecy begins again, and the bloodline, they're stirring. Solo Sikoa watches from the shadows. The Usos are fractured but still dangerous. New names whisper in corridors: Jacob Fatu, Zilla Fatu, and Paul Heyman. He plays both sides. As he always has, but for how long? Because this time, Roman Reigns isn't returning as a savior. He's returning as a storm, and when storms hit, nothing stands untouched, not even kings, not even Paul Heyman, and certainly not Seth Rollins. So now we ask, was this all part of the plan? Did Heyman sacrifice Seth to bring Roman back, or did Roman allow it to happen, just to remind the world that no one rules in his absence? And most importantly, is this the beginning of Roman Reigns' final reign, or the start of something darker, far more ruthless, than we've ever seen before? We don't know yet. But one thing is certain, the king has returned and the throne is no longer empty. The war for SummerSlam has just begun. The days that followed Roman Reigns' return were eerily quiet. No tweets. No interviews. No backstage brawls, but in WWE, silence is rarely peace. It's the calm before the storm. And in this case, the storm wore a crown made of legacy, vengeance, and unresolved fury. Roman didn't speak, not yet. But others did. Paul Heyman was first. He appeared on WWE's official digital platforms with a composed expression and a tone that gave nothing away. In the past, Heyman had been a voice of chaos, manipulative, dramatic, always spinning stories into a web of control. But this time, he simply said, Seth Rollins will not be at SummerSlam. The tribal chief is back. Adjust your expectations accordingly. And just like that, he walked off screen. No follow-up, no explanation, just the lingering echo of authority. Behind the scenes, WWE personnel were panicking. Creative had been thrown into disarray. The SummerSlam main event, once built around Seth Rollins defending his title, now had no champion, no storyline, and no clear replacement. But Roman didn't wait for their permission. 3 nights after his return, he made his move. During a live episode of SmackDown, as the show neared its end, the arena went black once more. A cold blue spotlight lit up the stage and Roman walked out, but not alone. Behind him were 2 shadows the WWE Universe had only seen in rumors and dark whispers: Jacob Fatu. Zilla Fatu, bloodline by birth. Violence by choice. These weren't allies. These were warriors. And they were ready to burn everything down. Roman entered the ring, slowly circling the microphone laid in the center. He picked it up, paused, then said the words that confirmed what many feared, and what Paul Heyman had desperately hoped to avoid. "This is not your kingdom anymore, Paul." The crowd roared in confusion and shock. Roman didn't blink. "I watched you stand beside Seth while I was gone. I watched you build a new empire on my ashes. I watched you whisper in the ears of men who will never be me. But I've returned. And now? I'm taking back everything." Backstage, Heyman was shown on camera, frozen, pale. It was the first time the WWE audience saw fear in the eyes of a man who had managed every legend from Brock Lesnar to CM Punk. But Roman was different. Roman wasn't Heyman's client anymore. Roman was Heyman's reckoning. Meanwhile, Seth Rollins watched from a hospital bed in Birmingham, Alabama. A WWE camera crew, allowed exclusive access, captured the moment the segment aired. Seth's jaw clenched. His eyes filled with pain, not from injury, but from understanding. He had been used. Paul Heyman didn't support him out of loyalty. He had simply kept the throne warm until Roman came back. Becky Lynch sat beside him, her hand gently squeezing his. But Rollins couldn't even return the touch. He was spiraling. Sources close to Seth described him as withdrawn and quiet in the days following Roman's return. He refused to talk creative. Refused to discuss recovery timelines. Refused to respond to WWE's public relations requests for statements. He was crumbling. "He feels like everything he did in the last year didn't matter," one backstage official said. Like he was just a placeholder in someone else's story. And maybe he was, because while Seth bled week after week to hold the show together, while he defended the title, traveled non-stop, fought monsters, and main event Raw, Paul Heyman had already chosen who he wanted standing tall at SummerSlam, and it wasn't Seth Rollins. The story took another sharp turn 1 week later. Triple H, the chief content officer, called a press conference. Cameras rolled. Journalists leaned in. Fans watched from around the world, and with a heavy expression, Triple H said, "We can now confirm that due to the extent of Seth Rollins' ligament fracture, he will not be cleared in time for SummerSlam. Effective immediately, the World Heavyweight Championship will be vacated." Gasps filled the room, but he wasn't finished, and at SummerSlam, a new champion will be crowned. In the main event, Roman Reigns versus Gunther. It was chaos. Gunther, the ring general. The man who had nearly ended Seth's career with a targeted assault on his leg during their last match. The man who had dominated the intercontinental scene for over a year now, he was being positioned as the final obstacle in Roman's path to reclaiming gold. But Roman, he wasn't just looking at Gunther, he was looking through him, because for Roman Reigns, this wasn't about titles anymore. It was about control. The tribal war was expanding. And Rollins' absence had left the gates wide open. Back in the hospital, Seth whispered just one word after seeing the press conference: "Good." It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't approval. It was the beginning of something darker, because Seth Rollins, once the architect, the visionary, was now the broken prince, and broken men, they don't return to reclaim, they return to ruin. While the world focused on Roman versus Gunther, something else was brewing in silence. Cody Rhodes. Solo Sikoa. Sami Zayn. Jey Uso, all players in a larger chessboard, now watching the old king return to the battlefield. But it was Paul Heyman who had the most to lose, because Roman may have let him walk beside the throne, but this time, he was coming for the man who dared to sit on it. The countdown to SummerSlam had begun, and behind every roar of the crowd, was the sound of betrayal, vengeance, and unfinished war, and at the center of it all, a fallen champion, a returning emperor, and a silent puppet master whose empire is beginning to crumble. It began with a single knock on the hospital door. Becky Lynch rose to answer it, expecting a nurse, but what stood outside was a package. No return address. No markings. Inside, wrapped in black cloth, was a pair of wrestling boots, Seth Rollins' boots, stained with dried blood, cracked from battle. And beneath them, a card: "If you're coming back, come back for war." There was no name. But there didn't need to be. Seth stared at it for a long time, then he reached for the remote and turned off the television. The same screen where just days earlier he had watched Roman Reigns return to thunderous applause. This wasn't about recovering anymore. This wasn't about championships. This was personal. Something in Seth Rollins broke the night he watched Roman walk through the fog on Raw. But from that break, something new began to form, not a man reborn, but a man remade. He stopped speaking about titles, Becky would later say. He stopped asking about rehab timelines. He started asking how long it would take to learn to walk again. Not to run. Just walk. Because Seth Rollins wasn't planning to return to climb the ladder. He was planning to return to burn it down. Meanwhile, the WWE locker room was beginning to fracture. Gunther, now elevated into the SummerSlam main event, didn't care for politics. He cared for dominance. And as Roman Reigns stalked the hallways like a war god returned from exile, the ring general made one thing very clear: there will be no coronation. I will not kneel. It was a statement directed straight at Reigns, and a message heard by every single member of the bloodline. Gunther wasn't afraid, and Roman, he smiled. For him, this was all happening exactly as it should. Rollins had been removed. The World Heavyweight title was in play. And Paul Heyman was right where Roman wanted him, cornered, smiling nervously through interviews, swearing loyalty while secretly watching his empire unravel. Because Roman hadn't forgotten what Heyman did. He hadn't forgotten the interviews, the endorsements, the title matches he brokered for Seth behind Roman's back. And now, Paul Heyman was trapped between the king he had abandoned and the king he had tried to create. It was only a matter of time before judgment arrived. 1 week before SummerSlam, the first public image of Seth Rollins outside the hospital was leaked. He was walking slowly. Carefully, but he was walking, and in that single blurry photo, something caught the eye of every WWE fan around the world. A black hoodie. And peeking from beneath the sleeve, white wrist tape. The architect was rebuilding. Social media exploded. Is Seth coming back at SummerSlam? Will he interfere in Roman vs. Gunther? Is he done with Heyman? Done with WWE? But Seth said nothing, not a word, just silence until the night before SummerSlam. On WWE's official YouTube, a new upload dropped without warning. No title. Just a black screen. Then, the voice of Seth Rollins. Low. Broken. Controlled. You ever build something for someone, just to watch them hand it away? Static flickers across the screen. I bled for this place. I carried it. When everyone else vanished, I stayed. And when I fell, the world clapped for my replacement. Cut to footage of Roman's return, the crowd roaring. Paul Heyman said I was never supposed to be the one. That I was just holding a place. That this was always Roman's kingdom. Pause. Breathing, but Roman doesn't know what's coming. None of them do. Because when you've lost everything, there's nothing left to protect. And I'm not coming back for titles. I'm coming back for truth. Fade to black. No music. No date, just one line etched on screen in crimson red: see you soon. That night, the arena was still buzzing, and Roman, he laughed backstage. Let him come, he said. He'll fall again. But even as he said it, he looked over his shoulder, because Roman Reigns may be many things, but he is not a fool, and somewhere deep inside, he knows Seth Rollins is not returning as a champion. He's returning as a reckoning. The day of SummerSlam arrived. Over 80,000 fans filled the stadium. The final match of the night, Roman Reigns vs. Gunther, World Heavyweight Championship, vacant. Suspicion, everywhere. Roman entered first, not smiling. Not smirking. Focused. Cold. He walked with Jacob and Zilla Fatu behind him, two shadows of war ready to maim. Heyman trailed behind, sweating through his collar. Gunther followed, alone. No Imperium. No entrance frills, just a mountain of brutality, ready to crush an empire. The bell rang, and what followed was not a wrestling match. It was a collision of gods. 25 minutes of thunderous slams, powerbombs, spear counters, chops so loud they echoed through the rafters, and then, it happened. Gunther had Roman down. Powerbombed into the mat. The referee counted 1, 2. Lights out. The arena plunged into darkness. Screams. Phones lit the stadium like stars, then a single spotlight hit the ramp and from the smoke, a silhouette limping but upright Seth Rollins. In black. In pain but walking, the crowd erupted. Roman sat up in the ring, eyes wide. Gunther, shocked, stood frozen. Seth didn't speak. He didn't run. He just walked to the edge of the ring and stared. Roman turned, and in that second, Gunther struck. Boom, powerbomb. 1, 2, 3. The stadium exploded. Gunther stood victorious. The new world heavyweight champion Roman Reigns, dazed, furious, stared up at the lights, and on the ramp, Seth Rollins smiled, not because he won but because Roman didn't. The game had changed again. He didn't speak for 37 minutes. After the match ended, Roman Reigns sat in the corner of the locker room, his back to the wall, drenched in sweat and disbelief. The roar of the crowd from Gunther's victory was still echoing through the concrete hallways. His fists were clenched. His breathing shallow. Across the room, Paul Heyman sat frozen on a bench, eyes darting from Roman to the floor, unsure of whether to apologize or flee. Zilla and Jacob Fatu stood by the door, arms crossed, silent, waiting for orders. Finally, Roman looked up, not at Heyman. At his gloves. He peeled them off slowly, methodically, one finger at a time, like a surgeon preparing for something far more precise than violence, and then, softly, he spoke, "You had one job, Paul." Heyman's voice cracked immediately. "Roman. I didn't know Seth would." Roman stood. 1 motion, like the weight of SummerSlam didn't exist on his shoulders, but his eyes, they weren't the same. Gone was the calm. Gone was the tribal pride. What remained was something colder. Something ancient. He walked toward Heyman, slow steps, controlled breaths. "You let him get that close to the ring." Heyman tried to explain, fumbling through excuses. Security lapse. Production confusion. Triple H's meddling. Roman didn't care because this wasn't about the interference, this was about the betrayal that didn't begin tonight, but months ago. When Heyman chose to back Seth Rollins while Roman was silent. When Heyman orchestrated opportunities. When he whispered in creative ears, pushed title matches, sold pay-per-views, all on Seth's back. "You fed the fire that burned my kingdom," Roman said. "And now you think you can sit at my table like nothing happened?" Paul Heyman stood, trembling. "I've always served the island of relevancy, Roman. You know that. You are the island." Roman stepped forward, now face to face with the man who once called him my tribal chief with unwavering loyalty. "Then why do I smell smoke, Paul?" The locker room door burst open, not violently, but enough to break the tension. It was Jacob Fatu. "There's press outside," he said. "They want to know if you're still the head of the table." Roman didn't answer. He just turned to Paul Heyman and whispered, "From now on, you answer to me, like everyone else." Then he walked past Heyman without another word because this time, there would be no forgiveness. Heyman had played both sides for too long and Seth Rollins had become the knife he placed into Roman's back, knowingly or not. Meanwhile, across the city in a dim hotel room, Seth Rollins sat in silence, not watching highlights, not celebrating Gunther's win. He didn't care about titles anymore. He had watched Roman lose. And that was the victory he needed, but something was shifting inside him. Not relief, not revenge, something deeper. Seth turned toward the window and saw his reflection, limping, bruised, scarred. A warrior undone. A visionary disillusioned. He had returned not to save Raw, but to remind it, he is still its soul. But now, he needed more. 1 Act of sabotage wasn't enough. 1 Distraction wasn't justice, because as long as Roman Reigns drew breath, the war wasn't over. Seth picked up his phone. Dialed a number. Waited. A voice answered. No, hello. "Just, are we doing this?" Seth responded, "He stole my future. Let's burn his past." Click. The camera panned away from Seth's window, to a man sitting in the adjacent room, pulling on black gloves, taping his fists. A man with nothing to lose. Dean Ambrose. WWE headquarters was already on fire, not literally, but logistically. The moment Gunther was handed the title, Vince, Triple H, and creative were thrown into chaos because everything they'd built, Roman's dominance, Seth's rise, Paul Heyman's manipulation, was now imploding. Gunther was champion, Seth was back, and Roman? Roman had just tasted public failure for the first time in 2 years. The rumors began immediately. Backstage sources claimed Roman had issued a list of names he held responsible for SummerSlam. At the top? Seth Rollins second? Paul Heyman and third, Triple H. Because in Roman's eyes, none of this would have happened if he hadn't been betrayed not just by his advocate, but by the company itself. He had returned to reclaim his throne, but instead found a kingdom in rebellion, and rebellion must be crushed. That following Monday on Raw, Seth Rollins appeared unannounced. No music. No fanfare. He simply walked, limping, eyes bloodshot, hair tied back. He stood in the ring, held a microphone for 13 seconds without saying a word. And then smiled. "You remember me now?" The crowd exploded. You cheered when Roman returned. You posted your little memes. You said I was finished. That my time was up. But I'm still here. And now I'm done playing nice. He paused. Roman. I know you're watching. I know you think you're going to come back, rebuild your empire, wear the gold, and stand tall again. But you forgot something. You forgot I built this place while you were hiding behind silence. And I'm going to tear it down brick by brick, until you're standing alone in the ruins. This isn't about titles anymore. This is about legacy. Mine. Yours. And how it all ends. Rollins dropped the mic. No catchphrase. No laugh. Just truth. Backstage, Roman watched the segment. Didn't blink. Didn't move. And then he said, "We end this at Survivor Series." The war was no longer theoretical. It was now scheduled. The days after SummerSlam weren't filled with celebration, they were filled with purges. Roman Reigns, shamed but not broken, had returned not just to reclaim dominance, but to clean house. Because in his mind, SummerSlam wasn't a loss. It was a message point, one that revealed who could be trusted, and who had to go. The first to fall, Jimmy Uso. He walked into Roman's locker room the following Friday on SmackDown, confident, maybe even defiant. After all, Jimmy had fought for the bloodline, taken bullets in tag wars, and even sacrificed his brother Jay to Solo's wrath to earn his place back in Roman's orbit. But Roman didn't want sacrifices, he wanted loyalty. Jimmy sat down across from Roman, still sweating from his match earlier in the night. His voice was casual. "You seen that crowd tonight, yes? They still chantin' we the ones. We ain't done." Roman didn't look at him. He simply poured a glass of water. "You were supposed to watch Seth." Jimmy blinked. "I did. No one knew he was gonna show up." Roman took a slow sip, then handed the glass to Zilla Fatu, standing beside him. Then he turned to Jacob Fatu and nodded once. Jacob moved in silence. In a flash, Jimmy was yanked from his seat, slammed against the wall. No shouting. No scolding, just a cold decree from Roman Reigns: "There are no second chances. You let a ghost walk into my ring." Jimmy groaned, struggling under Jacob's grip. But Roman leaned in close, his voice a whisper filled with venom. "You don't represent the bloodline anymore. You represent failure." Then Roman stood and walked away. Jacob let Jimmy drop, and just like that, Jimmy Uso, once the heartbeat of the bloodline, was cast out. But Roman's warpath didn't end there. Next on his list, Paul Heyman, the man who had whispered in the ears of kings, the man who had built legacies, then torn them down. Roman summoned him privately, not in the ring, not backstage, but in a darkened hallway beneath the arena. No lights. No cameras, just echoes and shadows. Roman stood with his back turned, hands behind his back, eyes staring into nothing. "You backed Seth. Don't lie." Heyman hesitated, then, with a voice trembling but defiant, he replied, "I did what I had to, Roman. You were gone. The show had to go on." Roman turned, slowly. "You mean you had to go on? You needed your spotlight. You needed someone to carry your legacy."